Well, let's put it this way. Molly's in bed and she is drifting some kind of reverie, and she recalls her youth, adolescence, and that actually took place in Gibraltar. She was actually born in Gibraltar. She was the result of a union between an Irish military man called Colonel Tweedy, and a Spanish Jewish girl, Lunisa Laredo. She recalls a time here. She recalled walking arm in arm with a lieutenant in Grand Parade. Her first kiss was somewhere beneath the wall in Rouge Castle. She'd been to Ince's Farm. She walked down Main Street. Bell Lane is also mentioned. A number of shops which are still there are mentioned also. So yeah, I think after Dublin, Gibraltar is the most outstanding or the most famous venue mentioned in Ulysses. So it really is quite something to realize that Gibraltar figures so prominently in the last chapter of this very important, iconic novel. Yeah.
And this is obviously a hugely celebrated book of which Gibraltar forms part. So how important is this in setting Gibraltar's importance and image in literature?
Let's put it this way. I know Dublin, I also know Gibraltar very well. And for me, the fact that why did Joyce choose Gibraltar of all places? He could have chosen any place in Italy. For example, he was living in Trieste anyway most of the time. Then he went to Paris, then went to Zurich. Why Gibraltar? I think because Gibraltar at that time, still is to a certain extent, an outpost of the British Empire. And he saw a kind of affinity between Gibraltar and an island. Ireland at that time was part of the empire too, fully, entirely, not just now Northern Ireland. The whole of Ireland was part of the British Empire. And I think he drew parallels between the imperial military presence of Gibraltar, of the British in Gibraltar, and of course in Ireland. Also, he realized that the native population had been suppressed, been discriminated against, and he saw something similar here in Gibraltar. The thing is, in Gibraltar at that time, we're talking about 1890, 1900, there wasn't really what we would call a proper native population, indigenous Gibraltarians. They didn't exist. What we had was a conglomeration of foreigners. You had Portuguese, you had Spaniards, you had Genoese, you had French, whatever, Irish, Scotch. And at that time, it's very much a melting pot. We haven't quite got a clear, definitive, Gibraltarian identity as such. So we don't come across Gibraltarians. We come across people from different races who live in Gibraltar, mainly merchant people. There's one in particular called Luigi, and he was supposed to be from Catalan Bay. I even went one day looking for Luigi, but his family anyway, but I didn't get very far, I'm afraid. Apparently there were many, many Luigis in Catalan Bay, so I didn't get very far with that.
Now, Ulysses has this towering reputation in literature, although many people might find it intimidating to try to read. What is the source of its enduring appeal and significance?
I think the answer is manifold. There isn't just one simple answer to that question. First of all, the scope is epic in scope. It's extremely ambitious. Then, of course, we have the innovations. We have things like, for example, the Homeric parallels. He actually draws parallels between what's going on in Dublin at that time and what happens in Homer's Odyssey. Those parallels are not crucial. You can actually read the novel without having any idea at all that, for example, that Ulysses is Leopold Bloom, that Molly's Penelope in Homer's Odyssey. You don't need to know that. The first edition of Ulysses did have the chapter headings where those, the Ithaca, Telemachus, etc., they all came out. But then Joyce realized that he was creating a problem. People were now looking for references and parallels and resemblances. So he said, no, I don't want that anymore. Let's just leave them out. So obviously the parallels are there, but they're not made explicit by providing you with a chapter heading that points in the direction of Homer. That's one thing. Then of course you have stream of consciousness. For the first time, we have someone looking into someone's mind and trying to somehow recreate what goes on in your mind, the sort of thought pattern, the rhythm of your thinking. It's not a correct transcription of what goes on in your mind onto a page. Obviously, Joyce has edited the whole thing, doctored it, changed it, improved it if you want, so that it's not just straightforward what happens in Bloom's mind or Stephen's mind or Molly's mind. But of course, for the first time, we do have this insight into the inner workings of a human mind. And it is very complex, very exciting. It's different, of course, because each character has his own or her own stream of consciousness. For example, Molly's one is just one thing pouring out after another. Stephen's is very esoteric, poetic, narcissistic, erudite, intellectual. Bloom is more common or garden, straightforward, the middleman, nothing particularly so outstanding about you, just a common man if you want. So there you already have three different streams of consciousness. Well, obviously, I think also the number of styles that prevail in the novel. There is as many styles as there are chapters. Really, each chapter has its own style, and even within the same chapter, you could have different styles. That also is quite innovative, I think, quite new, I think.
And on the 100th anniversary of the book's publication, are you hoping this will lead more people to read it and discover more of James Joyce's work?
Of course I do. This thing that I mentioned before, but in the cultural services, having some kind of a Joyce celebration around the statue of Molly Bloom would be a wonderful occasion to make the novel better known. I think people obviously are intimidated. You pick up a novel, it's so long, complicated, so many characters. The language can be very challenging too. And also to have the idea that it's a very serious undertaking. It isn't. It's a wonderfully comic novel. It's very, very funny most of the time. You have to do a bit of digging around, yes. You need to have notes if you want, an introduction, maybe a guide. There are umpteen guides now to help you, along your way, in the reading of the novel. But I sincerely hope that it would become. It's a novel that you can't just read in one go. You have to take it easy. You can't take it to the beach on August afternoon and lie back and just read. No, you've got to do it at home quietly, peacefully, and maybe a dictionary beside you, and also some kind of idea of Irish history, the politics in Ireland. People like Stuart Parnell, he appeared a number of times. Well, who is he? You got to look it up, obviously. But yeah, I think Joyce wanted it to be a popular novel, not some esoteric text for academics only. It has become that, obviously, yes, but he would obviously like to open it up to the ordinary, everyday reader.